I did everything right. That's the cruelest part of this confession. I made the sensible choices. I followed the rules. I avoided risks that could ruin my future. I listened when people older and wiser told me what mattered. I chose stability over uncertainty, reason over desire, safety over instinct. From the outside, my life looked correct. Respectable. Predictable in the way people admire quietly. I was the person others pointed to and said, "See, that's how you're supposed to live." And I believed them. For a long time, I truly believed that doing the right thing would eventually feel right. It never did. The first sign wasn't pain. It was absence. I noticed it in small moments when I achieved something I had worked toward for years and felt nothing but mild relief. When celebrations felt performative. When compliments landed like paperwork instead of joy. I told myself this was adulthood. That excitement was childish. That fulfillment was quieter than people made it seem. So I ignored the emptiness. I filled my days with routines. Mornings that looked the same. Conversations that stayed on the surface. Plans that made sense but didn't stir anything in me. I became efficient at living without being present. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself what I wanted. Not dramatically. Not consciously. I just stopped checking in. When a choice appeared, I filtered it through practicality, approval, logic. What would cause the least disruption? What would be easiest to explain? What would look reasonable 5 years from now? Desire never made it into the equation. I told myself that sacrifice was noble. That postponing myself was temporary. That one day, when everything was secure enough, I would finally allow myself to live. That day kept moving. Time has a way of doing that when you're waiting for permission. Years passed without milestones I could feel in my body. I aged, but I didn't grow. I adapted. I complied. I became someone reliable and hollow at the same time. At night, I lay awake with a strange, quiet thought repeating in my head, if this is the life I worked so hard to build, why do I feel like a guest in it? The question scared me because I didn't have an answer. Instead, I had excuses. I told myself I was lucky. That many people would want my life. That dissatisfaction was ungrateful. I compared myself downward until guilt drowned curiosity. That's how you betray yourself politely. The breaking point didn't arrive as a crisis. There was no dramatic event, no collapse visible from the outside. It came during an ordinary day, in the middle of an ordinary task, when I suddenly realized I was imagining a different life not as a fantasy but as a loss. I wasn't dreaming of becoming someone else. I was mourning the person I never allowed myself to be. That realization hit harder than regret ever had. I started to see my life differently. Not as a failure but as a series of ethical compromises I made with myself. Small ones, reasonable ones. Ones that added up to silence. I had chosen peace over truth. Approval over alignment. Being good over being honest. And the cost was my identity. The worst part wasn't that I was unhappy. The worst part was that I no longer trusted my own feelings. When you ignore yourself long enough, Your inner voice doesn't disappear, it becomes distorted. I didn't know if my discomfort meant danger or desire, fear or intuition. I had trained myself to override it so thoroughly that it no longer spoke clearly. I was living someone else's definition of a meaningful life. And I didn't know how to leave it without destroying everything. That's when the idea of escape appeared. Not escape as adventure. Escape as disappearance. The fantasy of not being known, not being expected, not being tied to the version of myself I had performed for so long. I didn't want to start over yet. I just wanted to stop being seen. That desire terrified me because it felt honest. Once the thought appeared, it didn't leave. I tried to push it away at first. I told myself it was a phase. Burnout. A delayed reaction to stress. I doubled down on discipline, convinced that if I just tried harder, the discomfort would disappear. I optimized my days. I corrected my attitude. I became even more responsible, even more controlled. And the emptiness grew sharper. There is a particular kind of breakdown that doesn't involve chaos. It looks calm, functional, invisible. You still show up. You still answer messages. You still fulfill expectations. But inside, something essential begins to erode. I felt like I was living behind glass. Everything reached me slightly late, slightly muted. Joy arrived diluted. Pain arrived distant. I reacted correctly to things without actually feeling them. I was present in form, absent in substance. That scared me more than panic ever could. Because panic demands attention. Numbness convinces you nothing is wrong. I began to resent my own life quietly. Not in anger, in grief. I looked at my past choices and understood that none of them were mistakes on their own. Each one had been reasonable, defensible, even kind. That was the trap. I hadn't ruined my life with one bad decision. I had surrendered it slowly through good ones. The moral dilemma was unbearable. How do you justify leaving a life that isn't broken? Nothing was objectively wrong. No abuse. No catastrophe. No clear villain. Just a deep, persistent misalignment that had no language socially acceptable enough to explain. People understand escape when there is pain they can see. They don't understand it when the pain is internal, ethical, existential. I knew what people would say if I tried to explain. You're overthinking. You're lucky. Everyone feels like this sometimes. Don't throw everything away. And the worst one, you'll regret it. The irony is that I was already living inside regret, just a quieter version of it. The thought of staying began to feel heavier than the thought of leaving. Staying meant continuing a life that made sense to everyone except the person living it. Leaving meant becoming the villain in other people's stories. I didn't know which version of guilt I could survive. That's when disappearance stopped being abstract. I started imagining what it would feel like to step outside my identity. To remove my name from expectations. To not be accountable to the image I had built so carefully. I wasn't craving freedom, I was craving truth without witnesses. The darker realization followed soon after. I didn't want a second chance. I wanted relief. And relief is dangerous, because it doesn't ask whether your reasons are noble. I wrestled with myself for months. I would decide to stay in the morning and plan to leave at night. I weighed consequences like a judge and desires like a criminal. I tried to negotiate with myself, change something small, wait another year, be grateful harder. None of it worked. Every time I chose safety over honesty, my body reacted first. Tight chest. Shallow breath. Sudden exhaustion that sleep didn't fix. It was as if my nervous system had already made a decision my mind refused to accept. The breakdown arrived quietly, during an ordinary conversation. Someone asked me about my future. A harmless question. The kind people ask when they assume you're still moving forward. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I didn't believe in any answer I could give. That was the moment I understood I was already gone. I was still physically present, still compliant, still performing, but internally, I had detached. I was maintaining a life I no longer inhabited. Disappearing no longer felt like an escape. It felt like an acknowledgement. But acknowledging something doesn't make it easier. The ethical weight crushed me. Leaving meant hurting people who hadn't done anything wrong. It meant invalidating years of effort. It meant admitting that I had participated in my own erasure willingly. I wasn't running from them. I was running from the version of myself that had learned how to survive without being alive. And that version was powerful. Convincing. Reasonable. It whispered that I owed the world consistency. That stability was a moral duty. That wanting more alignment was selfish. That suffering quietly was a form of maturity. I listened to that voice for years. Ignoring it now felt like betrayal. But for the first time, I asked a different question. What if staying is the greater betrayal? What if continuing this life knowing it hollowed me out was not noble, but cowardly? What if endurance without truth wasn't strength, but avoidance? Once that question landed, I couldn't unhear it. I realized that no one was forcing me to stay except fear and habit. And those are poor architects for a life. I didn't make the decision dramatically. I made it with grief. I accepted that there would be no clean ending. No version of this choice that spared everyone. I accepted that I would be misunderstood. That some people would rewrite my story to make sense of my absence. I also accepted something else, quietly and without pride. If I didn't leave now, I would disappear anyway, just internally, permanently. So I chose the kind of loss that at least left me a chance to remain real. Leaving didn't feel like freedom. It felt like stepping off solid ground and discovering you don't know how to swim. I didn't vanish overnight. I dismantled my life carefully, quietly, like someone afraid of waking a sleeping animal. I fulfilled obligations just enough to not raise alarms. I reduced explanations to vague sentences. I delayed decisions until they stopped being asked for. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened. Inside, everything ended. The moment I finally crossed the line, the moment I knew there was no return, was painfully ordinary. I was alone, doing something insignificant, when I realized I no longer felt guilty for wanting a different life. That scared me more than the guilt ever had. Because guilt meant connection. Its absence meant acceptance. The days that followed were disorienting. Without the structure of who I had been, time lost its shape. Mornings arrived without urgency. Evenings stretched endlessly. I wasn't chased by expectations anymore, but I wasn't held by meaning either. I had escaped the wrong life. I hadn't yet built the right one. There's a dangerous myth about starting over that clarity follows courage. That once you choose yourself, everything aligns. That relief is permanent. The truth is quieter and harsher. When you stop living a lie, you don't immediately know how to live the truth. You just know you can't go back. I spent weeks sitting with discomfort without anesthetics. No distraction. No narrative to justify myself. Just the raw consequences of choice. I let doubt speak. I let regret argue. I didn't silence them anymore. They weren't enemies. They were witnesses. I thought often about the people I left behind. Not in nostalgia, in responsibility. I didn't romanticize my absence. I allowed myself to understand the damage. The confusion. The unanswered questions. The quiet anger that comes when someone chooses themselves without explanation. I carry that. Second chances aren't clean. They don't erase impact. They don't absolve you. They simply give you a different direction to walk with everything you've done still attached to you. What changed wasn't my past. What changed was my relationship to it. I stopped trying to justify my life. I stopped measuring it against approval. I stopped asking whether my choices looked respectable. Instead, I ask smaller, harder questions. Does this feel honest? Does this cost me my integrity? Am I present, or am I performing again? I learned that identity isn't something you find after you leave, it's something you practice while staying. Staying with discomfort. Staying with uncertainty. Staying with the fact that no version of your life will ever be perfect enough to save you from regret. Regret doesn't mean you chose wrong. It means you chose fully. There are nights when I miss the safety of the life I abandoned. The predictability. The clarity. The ease of being understood. There are moments when I wonder who I would be now if I had stayed and numbed myself a little more gently. But those thoughts pass. What remains is something quieter than happiness. Alignment. I no longer live loudly. I don't announce milestones. I don't explain my choices unless asked, and sometimes not even then. I build my days around sustainability, not image. Around truth, not outcome. I don't need to disappear anymore. Because I stopped disappearing from myself. If this confession has a lesson, it isn't encouragement or warning. It's simply this: you can live the right life and still lose yourself. You can start over without erasing your past. And sometimes, the bravest choice isn't leaving everything behind. It's refusing to betray yourself quietly for the rest of your life. I don't know where this path ends. But for the first time, I know who is walking it. And that is enough.